Sarah Martinez wiped sweat from her forehead as she stirred the large pot of beef stew. The mess hall kitchen was always hot, but today felt different. The air conditioning unit had broken down again, and the desert heat outside made everything worse. She had been cooking for Navy SEALs for 3 years now, but something about this deployment felt off. The forward operating base in Syria was smaller than most, only 40 personnel, including 12 SEALs from Team 6. Sarah was one of only 3 women on the base working as a culinary specialist. Most people thought her job was easy, but feeding elite soldiers required skill and dedication. These men burned thousands of calories during their dangerous missions, and proper nutrition could mean the difference between life and death. Commander Jake Thompson walked into the kitchen, his tactical gear still dusty from the morning patrol. He was the team leader, a man in his late 30s with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. Sarah had noticed how he always checked on his men, making sure they ate properly and stayed hydrated. "Smells incredible in here, Martinez," he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator. "The guys are going to love this after tonight's mission." Sarah nodded, continuing to stir the stew. She had learned not to ask too many questions about their operations. Her job was to keep them fed and ready, but she couldn't help worrying. These men had become like brothers to her, and every mission carried deadly risks. The kitchen door swung open again as Petty Officer First Class Mike Rodriguez entered. He was the team's medic, a quiet man from Texas who always had a smile for Sarah. Behind him came 3 more SEALs, all looking exhausted from their training exercises. "Please tell me that's your famous beef stew," Rodriguez said, inhaling deeply. "We've been dreaming about it all day." Sarah laughed, ladling the stew into bowls. "Fresh bread's in the oven too. Should be ready in 20 minutes. As the SEALs ate, Sarah noticed their conversation was more serious than usual. They spoke in low voices about intelligence reports and potential threats in the region. She tried not to listen, but working in the kitchen made it impossible to avoid overhearing things. Lieutenant Kevin Walsh, the youngest member of the team at 24, seemed particularly nervous. He kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting trouble. Sarah had seen this behavior before in new soldiers. The stress of combat operations could affect anyone, no matter how well trained. "Martinez, you should probably know," Commander Thompson said, approaching her while she cleaned dishes. "We're expecting some unusual activity in the area tonight. Stay alert and keep your radio close." Sarah nodded, feeling a chill despite the kitchen's heat. She had been through several deployments and knew when commanders were truly concerned. This wasn't just routine caution. As evening approached, the SEALs prepared for their mission. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as they loaded their vehicles with equipment. Each man carried enough firepower to level a building, but she knew their real strength came from their training and brotherhood. The base settled into its nighttime routine. Sarah finished cleaning the kitchen and prepared breakfast ingredients for the next morning. She always came in early to have hot meals ready when the teams returned from missions. It was her small way of supporting these brave men. Around midnight, Sarah was startled awake in her quarters by unusual sounds outside. Vehicle engines that didn't sound like their usual Humvees, voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Her training kicked in immediately, and she reached for the radio Commander Thompson had insisted she keep beside her bed. Before she could activate it, her door exploded inward. 3 armed men in black clothing rushed in, shouting commands in Arabic. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the base was under attack. These weren't random insurgents. They moved with military precision and seemed to know exactly where they were going. One of the attackers grabbed Sarah roughly, zip-tying her hands behind her back. She tried to fight, but they were too strong and too many. As they dragged her outside, she could see fires burning in several buildings. The sound of gunfire echoed across the compound, but it wasn't the controlled burst she was used to hearing during training exercises. This was real combat. The attackers herded Sarah and other captured personnel toward the center of the base. She counted at least 20 enemy fighters, all heavily armed and wearing tactical gear. This was a well-planned assault, not a random attack. Her heart sank when she saw the SEALs being forced to their knees in the main courtyard. Commander Thompson had blood running down his face from a head wound. Rodriguez's arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Several other team members showed signs of injuries, but they were all alive. The enemy commander, a tall man with a thick beard and cold eyes, addressed the captured Americans in accented English. "You have been interfering with our operations for too long. Tonight you will pay the price." Sarah felt terror creeping up her spine, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her survival training had taught her that panic was the enemy in situations like this. She needed to observe, adapt, and look for opportunities. The enemy fighters seemed confident they had completely secured the base. They posted guards but appeared relaxed, talking among themselves and going through captured equipment. Sarah noticed they had overlooked some of the base's defensive positions, focusing mainly on the main buildings. As dawn approached, Sarah realized this wasn't just a raid. The attackers were setting up for a longer occupation. They were organizing supplies and establishing communication equipment. This meant they planned to hold the base and use the captured SEALs for something bigger. Commander Thompson caught Sarah's eye and gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Even as prisoners, the SEALs were still thinking tactically. Sarah understood the message: stay alert, stay alive, and be ready for anything. The sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Under different circumstances, Sarah would have found it beautiful. Instead, she watched enemy fighters patrol the base she had called home for 6 months, wondering if any of them would live to see another sunset. Little did their captors know, the quiet cook they had dismissed as harmless was about to become their worst nightmare. The second day of captivity began with brutal heat and growing desperation. Sarah sat in the dusty courtyard with the other prisoners, her hands still bound, watching the enemy fighters go through their captured equipment. The attackers had identified themselves as members of a Syrian militant group. Though Sarah suspected they had foreign backing based on their sophisticated weapons and tactics, Commander Thompson had managed to whisper information to Sarah during their brief moments when the guards weren't watching closely. The attack had been perfectly timed, hitting during a shift change when most of the SEALs were either returning from or preparing for missions. Intelligence had clearly been leaked to the enemy. Sarah's mind raced as she observed their captors' routines. 3 years of military training had taught her to notice details others might miss. The guards changed positions every 2 hours. They had posted lookouts on the main buildings but ignored the smaller utility structures. Most importantly, they seemed to view the non-combat personnel as minimal threats. Rodriguez, despite his broken arm, had been trying to provide medical care to the wounded prisoners using torn cloth and whatever supplies the captors allowed. His quiet work gave Sarah an idea. As a cook, she knew every inch of the base's layout, including areas the SEALs rarely visited. The kitchen had multiple entrances, storage areas, and even a small tunnel that connected to the generator building for utility access. During the afternoon, when the desert heat made everyone sluggish, Sarah noticed one of the guards had left his weapon unattended while helping move equipment. She memorized the location and began planning. Her father had been a Marine, and he'd taught her basic combat skills during her childhood. More importantly, her years feeding warriors had taught her about weapons, tactics, and how soldiers think. The enemy commander, who called himself Abu Hassan, seemed particularly interested in the SEALs' mission plans and communication codes. He had been interrogating Commander Thompson for hours, trying to extract information about American operations in the region. Thompson had given nothing, but Sarah could see the toll the questioning was taking on him. As evening approached, Abu Hassan announced his intentions to the prisoners. "Tomorrow we will begin broadcasting your executions to the world. The American public will see what happens to those who invade Muslim lands." His words sent chills through everyone present, but Sarah noticed the SEALs exchanged subtle glances. Even as prisoners, they were communicating. That night, the guards grew more relaxed. They had been holding the base for over 24 hours without any rescue attempts, making them confident that help wasn't coming. Sarah had been carefully working at her restraints during the day, using a sharp piece of metal she'd found near her position. Military zip ties were strong, but everything had weak points if you knew where to look. Around 2 in the morning, during the quietest part of the night, Sarah managed to free her hands. Her heart pounded as she slowly moved toward the kitchen building. The guard posted there was dozing against a wall, his rifle resting across his lap. Sarah had spent countless hours in this kitchen, moving quietly so as not to wake sleeping soldiers. Now those skills might save lives. She slipped inside through the back entrance, moving by memory in the darkness. The kitchen held more than just cooking equipment. Like most military facilities, it also stored emergency supplies, including first aid kits, emergency rations, and communication equipment. Sarah found the backup radio hidden behind cleaning supplies and carefully activated it. "Mayday, Mayday, this is forward operating base 77. She whispered into the device. "Base overrun, personnel captured, requesting immediate assistance." She repeated the message 3 times before hearing a crackled response. "FOB 77. This is Falcon Base. Confirm your identity and status." Sarah provided her identification codes and quickly explained the situation. The response was immediate. "Help is coming. Maintain position and stay hidden," but Sarah couldn't stay hidden. The SEALs were scheduled to die in the morning, and waiting for rescue might mean waiting too long. She needed to act now. Moving deeper into the kitchen, she began gathering supplies that could serve as weapons or distractions. Industrial cleaning chemicals could create smoke screens. Large knives were obvious weapons. Even the kitchen's gas lines could be weaponized by someone who knew what they were doing. Sarah had watched the SEALs train for 3 years. She'd seen them practice room clearing, weapons handling, and tactical movement. More importantly, she'd listened to their discussions about improvised weapons and unconventional warfare. They had often joked that a good cook could be as dangerous as any soldier, given the right circumstances. She began with the generator building, accessible through the kitchen's utility tunnel. The base's power came from 3 large diesel generators, and cutting power would give the prisoners several advantages. In the darkness, the SEALs would have better chances to escape or fight back. Sarah had helped maintain these generators as part of her duties, so she knew exactly which cables to cut. The tunnel was cramped and hot, filled with pipes and electrical conduits. Sarah crawled carefully, trying not to make noise that might alert the guards above. When she reached the generator room, she could hear voices outside, 2 guards talking quietly in Arabic. She waited until they moved on before emerging from the tunnel. Working by feel, Sarah located the main electrical panels. She had learned basic electrical work from the base engineers, knowledge that now proved invaluable. Instead of simply cutting power, she began sabotaging the system to create maximum confusion. She set timers on the backup generators to fail in sequence, ensuring the enemy couldn't quickly restore electricity. As she worked, Sarah thought about the SEALs who had become her family over the past 3 years. Commander Thompson, who always asked about her welfare and remembered details about her life back home. Rodriguez, who had helped her through a difficult period after her mother's death. Lieutenant Walsh, barely older than her own brother, who was facing execution in just a few hours. The base's electrical system was more complex than most people realized. Sarah began creating what military engineers called a cascading failure, a chain reaction that would disable multiple systems simultaneously. Communications, lighting, ventilation, and even some weapon systems depended on stable power. With the sabotage complete, Sarah made her way back through the tunnel. But instead of returning to the kitchen, she headed toward the armory building. The attackers had secured the main weapons, but Sarah knew about hidden caches the SEALs maintained for emergencies. Her years of preparing meals had given her access to every building on the base, including areas where backup weapons were stored. Dawn was still hours away, but Sarah could already hear increased activity from the guards. They were preparing for their planned executions, not knowing that the quiet cook they had dismissed was systematically dismantling their control over the base. Soon the real battle would begin, and Sarah intended to ensure her SEAL brothers had every possible advantage in the fight for their lives. Sarah reached the armory building, just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. The structure was smaller than the main buildings, but heavily reinforced. The attackers had posted only 1 guard here, confident they had secured all the weapons inside. What they didn't know was that the SEALs had created hidden weapon caches throughout the base, including one behind a false wall in the armory's maintenance section. Moving like a shadow, Sarah approached the building from the rear. The guard was facing the main compound, watching for threats from the outside rather than from within. Sarah's heart hammered as she remembered her father's lessons about moving silently. Every step had to be deliberate, every breath controlled. She slipped inside through a maintenance hatch she had used many times while helping with building upkeep. The hidden cache was exactly where Commander Thompson had once mentioned during a casual conversation months ago. Behind panels that looked like ordinary electrical boxes, the SEALs had stored pistols, ammunition, flashbang grenades, and even C4 explosives. Sarah selected a pistol and extra magazines, tucking them into her clothing. The explosives were tempting, but she lacked the training to use them safely. Instead, she took several flashbang grenades and smoke canisters. Her plan was forming as she worked. Create maximum confusion, free the SEALs, and hold out until rescue arrived. The sound of diesel generators coughing to life told Sarah her sabotage was beginning to work. She had programmed the failures to begin just before dawn, when the guards would be most tired and least alert. The first generator died with a mechanical groan, plunging part of the base into darkness. Shouts erupted from the compound as the second generator failed 30 seconds later. Sarah could hear Abu Hassan barking orders in Arabic, demanding his men check the power systems. This was exactly what she had hoped for: confusion and divided attention when she needed it most. Moving back toward the main compound, Sarah positioned herself near the kitchen building where she had the best view of the prisoners. The SEALs were still bound and under guard, but she could see Commander Thompson's head turn slightly toward the failing generators. He understood something was happening. The third generator died just as the sun crested the horizon, leaving the base operating on emergency battery power that Sarah knew would last less than 30 minutes. In the growing daylight mixed with electrical darkness, she had her best chance to act. Sarah pulled the pin on her first flashbang grenade and counted to 3 before rolling it toward the group of guards nearest the prisoners. The explosion was deafening and blindingly bright, exactly as intended. Even though she had covered her ears and closed her eyes, the concussion left her dizzy, but the effect on the unprepared guards was devastating. 3 men dropped their weapons, clutching their ears and stumbling blindly. Sarah sprinted from her concealment, firing the pistol with more accuracy than she had expected. Her father's training and 3 years of watching SEALs practice had taught her more than she realized. The first guard went down as Sarah's bullet caught him in the shoulder. She wasn't trying to kill unnecessarily, but she needed these men neutralized. The second guard was still blind and deaf from the flashbang, making him easy to disarm. Sarah grabbed his rifle and used the butt to knock him unconscious. Commander Thompson was already working to free himself, using the chaos to break his damaged restraints. "Martinez, the keys!" he shouted over the ringing in everyone's ears. Sarah tossed him the key ring she had taken from one of the guards, then turned to provide covering fire as more enemy fighters responded to the commotion. The compound erupted into a firefight as the freed SEALs grabbed weapons from their fallen captors. Despite their injuries and time in captivity, these elite warriors immediately returned to their lethal effectiveness. Rodriguez, even with his broken arm, was directing other prisoners to safety while laying down suppressing fire with his good hand. Abu Hassan appeared from the command building, screaming orders and firing an automatic rifle toward Sarah's position. Bullets chewed up the concrete near her head, forcing her to dive behind a supply crate. She could hear the distinctive sounds of SEAL combat tactics, short controlled bursts of gunfire, tactical movement, and precise communication, even in the chaos. "Sarah," Commander Thompson's voice cut through the gunfire. "We need to reach the radio room. Can you get us there?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see her from his position. The radio room was in the administration building, which meant crossing 50 yards of open ground under enemy fire. But she knew every building, every pipe, every piece of cover on this base. "Follow me," she called back, then began moving in a crouched run toward the administration building. The SEALs moved with her, using tactical formations that kept her protected while they advanced. Sarah realized they were treating her like one of their own team members, trusting her knowledge of the base layout. A bullet struck the wall inches from Sarah's head, sending concrete fragments into her face. She tasted blood but kept moving. Behind her, she could hear Lieutenant Walsh returning fire with deadly precision. These men she had fed and worried about were now fighting for all their lives, and her actions had given them this chance. The radio room's door was locked, but Rodriguez produced a small explosive charge from somewhere in his gear. "Clear the door!" he shouted, then blew the lock with a controlled detonation that left Sarah's ears ringing again. Inside, Sarah quickly activated the base's main communication system, while Thompson and the other SEALs established defensive positions at the windows. "Falcon Base, this is FOB 77 actual." Thompson spoke into the microphone. "Base partially secured, requesting immediate air support and medical evacuation." The response was immediate and welcome. "FOB 77, Falcon Base. Apache gunships en route, ETA 12 minutes. AC-130 gunship following for close air support." Sarah felt a surge of hope, but 12 minutes was a long time in a firefight. Outside, she could hear Abu Hassan rallying his remaining fighters for what sounded like a final assault on their position. The enemy commander was shouting about American air power and the need to finish the executions before help arrived. Rodriguez appeared beside Sarah, his broken arm now in an improvised sling. "Martinez, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said with a grin that didn't hide the pain in his eyes. "But we're not out of this yet. Hassan's got at least 15 fighters left, and they're setting up for a coordinated attack." Through the radio room's reinforced windows, Sarah could see enemy fighters moving into position around the building. They had rocket-propelled grenades and enough firepower to level the structure if necessary. The race was now between incoming American air support and a final enemy assault. Commander Thompson checked his weapon and looked around at his team. Despite injuries, exhaustion, and being outnumbered, these SEALs were ready to fight to the end. Sarah realized she was now truly one of them, no longer just the cook who fed them, but a warrior who had proven herself in combat. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, but so did the enemy's preparation for their final attack. Sarah gripped her rifle tighter, knowing the next few minutes would determine whether any of them lived to tell this story. The first rocket-propelled grenade struck the radio building's exterior wall at exactly 0647 hours, sending shockwaves through the reinforced structure. Sarah felt the building shake as concrete dust rained from the ceiling. Commander Thompson immediately began coordinating defensive positions while maintaining radio contact with the approaching aircraft. "Apache lead, this is FOB 77 actual." Thompson spoke urgently into the microphone. "Building under direct assault, approximately 15 hostiles with RPGs and automatic weapons. Need immediate close air support." The response crackled through static. "FOB 77, Apache lead. Visual contact with your position. Identify friendlies for gun run." Sarah found herself thinking with deadly clarity despite the chaos around her. 3 years of feeding these warriors had taught her how they operated under pressure, and now she was experiencing it firsthand. The fear was there, but it was controlled, focused into useful action rather than paralyzing terror. Rodriguez had positioned himself at the east window, his good arm steadying his rifle against the frame. "I count 8 tangos moving up from the motor pool," he called out. "They're using the Humvees for cover." Lieutenant Walsh was at the opposite window, his young face set with grim determination. "Western approach has at least 6 more. They're trying to flank us through the mess hall." Sarah's heart clenched at the mention of her kitchen being used by the enemy, but there was no time for sentiment. Abu Hassan's voice echoed across the compound, shouting commands in Arabic. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. This was their final push. The enemy commander knew American air support was imminent, and he was willing to sacrifice everything to eliminate the witnesses to his failed operation. Another RPG struck the building, this time hitting closer to their position. The explosion blew out 2 windows and filled the room with choking smoke. Sarah felt blood running down her face from flying glass, but she maintained her position covering the main entrance. "Movement on the north side," she called out, surprising herself with how calm her voice sounded. Through the smoke and dust, she could see 3 fighters approaching with what looked like explosive charges. They were planning to blow the building apart rather than assault it directly. Thompson made a quick tactical decision. "Walsh, Rodriguez, suppressing fire on the north approach. Martinez, you're with me. We're going to clear them before they can plant charges." Sarah's military training kicked in as she followed Commander Thompson toward the building's rear exit. She had never been in direct combat before, but watching the SEALs operate for 3 years had taught her the basics of tactical movement. Stay low, move fast, communicate constantly. They burst from the rear exit just as the 3 enemy fighters reached the building's foundation. Thompson's rifle barked 3 times in rapid succession, dropping 2 of the attackers instantly. The third spun toward Sarah, raising his weapon, but her pistol was already aimed at his center mass. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When someone's trying to kill you, hesitation is the enemy." Sarah's shot took the fighter in the chest, dropping him before he could fire. She felt a moment of shock at what she had done, but Thompson's hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present. "Good shooting, Martinez. Now we need to get..." Back inside before the world exploded around them as an RPG struck the ground 10 feet away. The blast lifted both Sarah and Thompson off their feet, slamming them against the building's wall. Sarah's ears were ringing so badly she couldn't hear anything, but she could see Thompson's mouth moving urgently. Through her dazed vision, Sarah saw enemy fighters advancing from multiple directions. The building was about to be overrun and the Apache helicopters were still several minutes away. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate properly. Blood was running down her face and her left arm felt wrong somehow. Thompson was pulling her toward the building entrance, his own face covered in blood and dirt. Through the broken windows, Sarah could see Rodriguez and Walsh still firing at advancing enemies, but they were clearly running low on ammunition. That's when Sarah heard the most beautiful sound of her life. The distinctive whop, whop, whop of Apache helicopter rotors, much closer than expected. Through her damaged hearing, she could make out the pilot's voice over the radio. FOB 77, Apache lead. We have visual on multiple hostiles surrounding your building. Danger close engagement authorized. Keep your heads down. The first burst from the Apache's 30mm chain gun sounded like the world's largest zipper being pulled incredibly fast. The rounds chewed through enemy positions near the motor pool, turning vehicles into twisted metal. Sarah watched in amazement as the helicopter's devastating firepower eliminated threats with surgical precision. Abu Hassan and his remaining fighters were caught in the open, having committed everything to their final assault. The second Apache appeared from the opposite direction, its rockets turning enemy positions into clouds of smoke and debris. Within 90 seconds, the compound had gone from an active firefight to an eerie silence broken only by the helicopters circling overhead. Commander Thompson helped Sarah back inside the building, where Rodriguez immediately began treating her injuries. Her left arm was broken, and she had multiple lacerations from the explosion, but she was alive and conscious. More importantly, all of the SEALs had survived the final assault. Martinez, Thompson said as Rodriguez worked on her arm. What you did here goes beyond anything I've ever seen from a non-combatant. You didn't just save our lives. You planned and executed a tactical operation that would impress any Special Forces commander. Sarah tried to respond but found herself overwhelmed by the reality of what had just happened. She had killed men. She had been in actual combat. The quiet cook who had spent 3 years making meals had become a warrior in the span of less than 12 hours. The radio crackled with updates from the Apache pilots. FOB 77, compound appears secure. Count 11 hostile KIA, 4 wounded captured. Medical evacuation helicopter inbound, ETA 6 minutes. As the adrenaline began wearing off, Sarah felt the full impact of her injuries and exhaustion. But looking around at the SEALs she had helped save, she also felt something else. A deep satisfaction that she had proven herself when it mattered most. These men who had been like brothers to her were alive because she had refused to remain helpless. Rodriguez finished splinting her arm and sat back with a tired smile. You know, Sarah, I think it's time we started calling you by your proper rank. What do you say, Sergeant Martinez? The sound of rescue helicopters grew louder outside, bringing medical help and extraction to safety. But Sarah knew this experience had changed her forever. She was no longer just the cook in the mess hall. She was a proven warrior who had fought alongside the best soldiers in the world and emerged victorious. The medical evacuation helicopter touched down in a cloud of desert dust 30 minutes after the final shots were fired. Sarah watched from a stretcher as paramedics worked on the more seriously wounded prisoners. Her broken arm was properly splinted now, and the cuts on her face had been cleaned and bandaged, but the real healing would take much longer. Commander Thompson walked beside her stretcher as they moved toward the helicopter. Despite his own injuries, a concussion, multiple lacerations, and what appeared to be cracked ribs, he had refused treatment until all his people were cared for. That was the kind of leader Sarah had come to respect during her years at the base. The brass wants a full debrief when we get back to the main base, Thompson told her over the helicopter's noise. What you did here is going to generate a lot of attention. Are you ready for that? Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for anything. The events of the past day felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She had killed 3 men and helped orchestrate a tactical operation that had saved 12 lives. The quiet cook who had enlisted to serve her country in a support role had become something entirely different. The flight to the main hospital facility took 2 hours. During the journey, Sarah found herself studying the faces of the SEALs who had shared her ordeal. Rodriguez dozed fitfully despite his injuries, occasionally wincing when the helicopter hit turbulence. Lieutenant Walsh stared out the window with the 1,000-yard stare Sarah had seen in other young soldiers after their first real combat. But it was Commander Thompson who surprised her most. Despite everything they had been through, he was already planning. She could see him making notes in a small notebook, documenting details of the attack and their response. Even battered and exhausted, he was thinking like a professional soldier. The hospital at the main base was a blur of medical personnel, bright lights, and urgent questions. Sarah found herself separated from the SEALs as doctors worked to assess and treat her injuries. X-rays confirmed her arm was broken in 2 places, requiring surgery to properly set the bones. But the physical injuries were the least of her concerns. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, arrived while Sarah was waiting for surgery. She was a stern woman in her 50s who had served in multiple combat zones and had a reputation for taking care of her people. She pulled up a chair beside Sarah's bed and spoke quietly. "Martinez, I've been briefed on what happened at FOB 77. What you did was extraordinary, but I need you to understand the implications. The media will want to turn this into a story about a heroic female cook. The politicians will want to use it for their own purposes. How do you want to handle that?" Sarah had been dreading this conversation. She had joined the military to serve quietly, not to become some kind of poster child for female empowerment or military heroism. But she also understood that her actions had consequences beyond her personal preferences. "I just want to get back to work, ma'am," Sarah said honestly. "Those SEALs are my family. I did what anyone would do for their family." Colonel Hayes smiled for the first time since arriving. "I don't think you understand yet, Martinez. What you did wasn't what anyone would do. Most people would have stayed hidden and waited for rescue. You planned and executed a military operation that freed a captured SEAL team. That takes training, courage, and tactical thinking that goes well beyond basic military service." The surgery on Sarah's arm took 3 hours. When she woke up in recovery, she found Commander Thompson sitting beside her bed. His head was bandaged and he moved carefully because of his injured ribs, but he was alert and clearly had something important to say. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got blown up by an RPG," Sarah replied, then immediately regretted the dark humor. But Thompson chuckled, which told her he understood. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what happens next. Your enlistment is up in 6 months and you've been talking about getting out and going to culinary school. But I want to offer you another option." Sarah listened as Thompson explained that her actions had caught the attention of Special Operations Command. They were offering her the opportunity to attend advanced military training, potentially leading to assignment with Special Operations Support Units. She would still be a culinary specialist, but one trained to operate in high-risk environments alongside elite forces. "Think about it," Thompson said. "You've proven you can operate under the most extreme conditions. With proper training, you could be saving lives and supporting critical missions for years to come. Plus, the military would pay for any culinary training you want, including advanced degrees." Over the next week, as Sarah recovered from her surgery, she had time to think about her future. The SEALs visited her regularly, sharing stories and keeping her spirits up. Rodriguez brought her books about military tactics, joking that she had already proven she could think like a special operator. Lieutenant Walsh, who had initially been the most shaken by their ordeal, seemed to have found new confidence through the experience. The media attention Colonel Hayes had warned about materialized quickly. Reporters wanted interviews, and various military officials wanted to use her story for recruiting purposes. Sarah found herself uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the opportunity to honor the SEALs who had fought alongside her. During one interview with a military journalist, Sarah tried to explain what had really happened at FOB 77. "People want to make this about me being a woman or about military training overcoming impossible odds. But the truth is simpler. I was with 12 of the finest warriors our country has ever produced. When they were in trouble, I did whatever I could to help them. That's not heroism. That's just family taking care of family." The journalist pressed her about her plans for the future, but Sarah wasn't ready to discuss that publicly. She was still processing the offer. from Special Operations Command and trying to understand how this experience had changed her. What she did know was that her relationship with the SEALs had evolved into something deeper than the casual friendship between support staff and combat personnel. They had shared mortal danger and emerged as brothers and sister in arms. Rodriguez had started calling her warrior princess, which made her laugh despite herself. Walsh had begun asking her advice about tactical problems, treating her opinions with the respect usually reserved for experienced operators. But it was Commander Thompson's quiet confidence in her abilities that meant the most. He had seen her under the worst possible circumstances and emerged believing she could handle whatever challenges came next. That faith from a man she respected deeply was worth more than any medal or promotion the military might offer. As Sarah's physical recovery progressed, she began to understand that the real challenge lay ahead. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she